The first thing anyone noticed was not the strange shelter rising on the empty prairie. It was the silence of the girl building it. Day after day, while the autumn wind rolled dry tumbleweeds across the Dakota grass, one young woman walked behind them. She did not chase them away. She picked them up. One by one, large ones, small ones, broken ones. By sunset, her wagon stood piled higher than her own shoulders. The other settlers stopped their work just to watch. Nobody could understand why a 19-year-old girl was filling her land with weeds when winter was only weeks away. One afternoon, a loud burst of laughter carried across the open plain. A rancher resting beside his fence slapped his knee and pointed toward the growing pile. "Looks like the Voss girl is fixing to build herself a rabbit nest." The men around him laughed harder. Another called out through the wind, "When the first snow comes, we'll find her buried under her own kindling." Hattie Voss never answered. She simply bent down, lifted another tumbleweed into the wagon, and kept walking. If you have ever seen someone solve a problem in a way everyone else laughed at, stay with this story. Because what happened during the winter of 1888 on the northern plains still surprises people today. The story begins 1 year earlier, in a small log cabin, 6 miles east of a place called Dry Creek Bend, Dakota Territory. It was February of 1886, and it was the coldest month anyone in the region could remember. The Voss cabin stood alone on a rise, built by their father Elias Voss with logs hauled from a river bottom 40 miles away. He had been proud of that cabin. He had called it the best-built house between two rivers. He had told his wife, Margaret, that no wind on earth would find its way through those walls. He was wrong. The cold came slowly. First it slid through the corner where the chinking had shrunk. Then it crawled along the floor. Then it climbed the walls. By the third night, frost had bloomed on the inside of the windows in thick white feathers. The fire burned. The wood dwindled. The cold did not care. Margaret coughed first. Then Elias. Hattie heated water on the stove and held cups to their lips. She was 18 years old. She did not sleep for 2 days. On the fourth night, her father called her to his side. He took her hand. His fingers were already stiff. He said only one thing: "Take care of Silas." Then he closed his eyes. Margaret held on 1 day longer. On her last afternoon, she looked at her daughter, with eyes that seemed to have traveled somewhere far away. She whispered a name Hattie had never heard before. She said, "Papa. Papa, you were right." And then she was gone too. The storm outside did not stop. It went on for 3 more days. Hattie sat between her parents' bodies and held her younger brother in her lap. Silas was 14. He did not cry. He shivered. She wrapped every blanket she could find around him. She stoked the fire until there was almost nothing left to burn. She talked to him. She told him stories about summer, about the creek, about the wild strawberries that grew near the old cottonwood. She talked so he would not fall asleep, because she was afraid if he slept he would not wake. On the 4th day, a neighbor found them. His name was Amos Barrow. He was an old man who lived 2 miles south. He had come by to check the smoke from their chimney. There had been no smoke for a day and a half. He carried Silas out first. Then he came back for Hattie. She would not leave the bodies. He had to lift her. He was 70 years old. He said later he did not know where he found the strength. They buried Elias and Margaret Voss on the little rise behind the cabin, in frozen ground. It took 3 men and 2 mules to break the earth. Hattie stood by the graves in her mother's shawl. She did not cry. She did not speak. She only looked west, toward the empty prairie, toward the horizon where the storms came from. And she made a promise. Silent, fierce, whole. She would build a house that no cold could enter. She did not yet know how, but she would build it, or she would die trying. That was February 1886. By autumn 1887, she was ready to begin. The land she and Silas held was a quarter section their father had claimed under the Homestead Act. Under the law, they had to prove up. which meant building a dwelling, cultivating the land, living on it for 5 years. Their father had done 4. They had to finish the last. The land inspector's office in the county seat had already sent one notice. A structure of measurable value must stand on the claim by the following spring, or the claim would revert. Hattie read the notice twice. Then she folded it and put it in her mother's Bible. She had $37, 1 old wagon, 2 thin horses, a canvas tent, a small pile of tools, and a memory. The memory was of an old man, her mother's father. His name was Ezra Voss, and he had been the strangest man Hattie had ever known. Ezra had come from a place far to the south, a high dry country where the trees were few and the wind was constant. He had spent 40 years herding sheep across grasslands that most people said no man could survive. He had come north when Margaret married Elias. He had lived with them for the last 3 years of his life. Hattie was 7 years old when he died, but she remembered him clearly. She remembered his hands, brown, cracked, gentle. She remembered the smell of his coat, wool and wood smoke and something wild she could not name. And she remembered the day he took her walking. It was late autumn. The wind was already sharp. He led her half a mile from the cabin to a place where 2 shallow washes met. There, half hidden in the grass, stood something she had never seen, a low mound, round, gray, woven from dried brush and grass and small willow poles. He knelt down and lifted a woven flap. He motioned her inside. She crawled through a low tunnel, and then she stopped. The wind was gone, not muffled, not softer, gone. She turned to him, her eyes wide. He smiled. "Put your hand on the wall," he said. She pressed her small palm against the tightly woven brush. It was warm, not hot, just alive, just holding. He pointed to the outside. That side, cold enough to sting. He pointed to the inside wall. This side, different. She nodded. She did not have words yet. He knelt beside her and spoke low. "Little one, remember this. The thing people throw away is often the thing that will save them. The world laughs at what it does not understand. But the world is often wrong." He tapped her forehead lightly, then her chest. "Keep it here, and here. You will need it one day." Then he took her hand and walked her home. He died 2 months later, in his sleep, peaceful. He was buried on the same rise, where her parents would join him a decade later. She had not thought of that day in years. Not until the winter of 1886, when she sat between her parents' bodies in a cabin that could not keep them warm. Then she remembered, all of it, as if the old man was standing behind her, speaking again. The thing people throw away. The autumn of 1887 came dry, and bright and windy. Perfect tumbleweed weather. The Russian thistle, they called it, or wild cali, or just weed. Nobody wanted it. Ranchers cursed it. Farmers burned it. It rolled across the prairie in armies, caught in fences, piled against barns, clogged wells. It was, everyone agreed, the most useless plant on earth. Hattie looked at it and saw walls. She began on a Tuesday. She hitched the old wagon. She whistled for the dog, and she set out across the grass. The dog was a rangy brown mongrel, with a white patch across one eye. His name was Rook. She had raised him from a pup. He was 3 years old. He never left her side. He was, in a way, the last living thing that connected her to the old man, because Ezra had kept a dog of the same breeding. And when the pup had been born to a neighbor's bitch, Hattie had asked for him. Because the shape of his head was right, because his eyes were right, because somewhere in his bones, she felt, was a piece of her grandfather still walking the earth. Rook trotted beside the wagon, nose to the ground, ears up. He seemed to know something important was beginning. They walked for 3 hours that first day. Hattie stopped at every tumbleweed she saw. Some were as tall as she was. Some were as small as her fist. She lifted them. She studied them. She placed them in the wagon by size. By the time the sun began to slide toward the horizon, the wagon was 2/3 full. Her hands were scratched. Her back ached. The wind had chapped her cheeks. She had never felt more certain of anything. That was the moment the laughter started. A wagon came up the road. 2 men on the seat. A rancher named Coburn Crane and his hired hand. Coburn was 24 years old. Broad in the shoulder. Sharp in the tongue. He had been the loudest young man at church since he was a boy. He liked an audience. He always found one. He pulled up his team. He looked at Hattie's wagon. He looked at the pile of tumbleweeds. He looked at her scratched hands. And he began to laugh. "Miss Voss," he called. "You lost something out here?" She did not answer. "Because it looks like you're picking up trash." He grinned at his hired hand. The hired hand grinned back. "You need money that bad? I got some chores you can do." Silence. From Hattie. From Rook. From the wind. Coburn leaned his elbow on his knee. "Or is this some kind of joke? Because I don't get it." She looked up. She met his eyes. She said, "It isn't a joke." He blinked. Something in her voice caught him. He recovered quickly. Laughed again. Louder. "All right then. Well, when you build yourself a haystack for a house, you let me know. I'll come by with matches." He clicked his tongue. The team pulled forward. His laughter faded down the road. Rook growled low in his throat. Hattie put her hand on his head. "Easy," she said. "He hasn't learned yet." That was the first day. By the end of the first week, everyone in Dry Creek Bend had heard about the Voss girl and her weeds. By the end of the second week, they were calling her the Tumbleweed Queen. By the end of the third week, the name was on the lips of children who had never met her. Hattie heard the name. She did not answer to it. She did not object to it. She simply kept walking, kept lifting, kept building. Silas heard it too. Silas heard it in the general store. He heard it in the blacksmith's yard. He heard it from a boy his own age who elbowed a friend and whispered loud enough for Silas to catch. He heard it, and it burned. He was 15 years old now. He was tall for his age. He had his father's jaw. He wanted to be seen as a man. He wanted people to look at him and see a Voss the way they had looked at his father. With respect. With a nod. With a raised hat. Instead, they looked at him and saw the Tumbleweed Queen's little brother. One evening he came back from the store with a small sack of flour and a fury he could no longer swallow. He set the sack down on the wagon board. He stood in front of his sister. "Hattie!" She was tying twine around a bundle of dried brush. She did not look up. "Hattie, listen to me." She looked up. "Everybody's laughing at us." She said, "I know. Everybody. I know." He waited for more. She gave him nothing. His voice rose. "Do you not care? Do you not hear it? They think we're crazy. They think we're worse than crazy. They think we're a joke." She set down the twine. She stood. She was 5 inches shorter than he was, but somehow in that moment she seemed taller. She said, "I heard you the first time. Then say something." "About what?" "About stopping. About building a real house. Like everyone else. Like Papa would have." There was a long silence. Rook lifted his head from the grass. Hattie's face did not change. But something behind her eyes did. Silas saw it. He almost stepped back. She said quietly, "Papa did build like everyone else. And you and I buried him in it." Silas opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He said, "You're not Mama. You can't tell me what to do." She did not answer. He turned and walked away toward the tent. His shoulders were shaking. She did not know if it was from anger or something else. She did not follow him. She sat back down. She picked up the twine. She began to tie again. Rook came and rested his head on her knee. She scratched him behind the ears with one hand, while the other kept working. She did not cry. She had not cried since the morning after her mother died. She was not sure she remembered how. Only later, alone in the dark, did she whisper to the dog, "He isn't wrong. He's a boy. He wants to be seen." Rook thumped his tail once against the ground. But if I stop now, she said, he doesn't get to become a man. He gets to die in a real house, like Papa. She looked at the small pile of tumbleweeds waiting by the wagon. Her voice was very quiet. I would rather he hate me warm than love me cold. 2 days later, the inspector came. His name was Thaddeus Rourke. He was 51 years old, thin as a fence rail, neat mustache, bowler hat, small square spectacles that made his eyes look further away than they were. He arrived in a black buggy with a bay mare that looked better fed than most children in the county. He stepped down. He straightened his coat. He walked around the willow frame Hattie had planted into the ground. The frame looked like the ribs of some giant beast, curved, bare, waiting for skin. He said nothing for a long time. Then he opened a leather notebook. He touched his pencil to his tongue. He said, "Are you Miss Harriet Voss?" She said, "I am." "You are the eldest surviving heir of Elias Voss?" "I am." "Then this claim is registered in your name, and your brother's name jointly?" "It is." He made a mark. He looked up. He looked at the willow ribs. He looked at the pile of tumbleweeds beside the wagon. He looked at Hattie. He said, "What am I looking at?" She said, "A house." He waited. She waited. He wrote something in the notebook. Then he said, "I do not see lumber." "No." "I do not see a stone foundation." "No." "I do not see brick. I do not see sod. I do not see any construction material recognized by the Territorial Land Office as constituting a permanent improvement." "No." He closed the notebook, slowly, deliberately. "Then I do not see any improvement of measurable value." Silas had come out of the tent. He stood behind his sister. His fists were clenched at his sides. His face was pale. Rourke turned to him. "Young man, are you the joint claimant?" Silas said, "Yes, sir." "And do you approve of your sister's plan?" Silas hesitated. Half a second. It was long enough. Rourke smiled. Just a little. Only at one corner of his mouth. He said, "I thought so." He turned back to Hattie. "Miss Voss, you have until the last day of March 1888. If on that date there is no dwelling on this land that meets the standard of habitable improvement, the claim will be forfeited. Do you understand?" She said, "I understand." "Do you understand what will become of you and your brother in that event?" "I understand." He tipped his hat. He climbed back into the buggy. He picked up the reins. He paused. He looked once more at the willow ribs, then at Hattie. He said, "I knew your father, Miss Voss." Hattie's head lifted slightly. Rourke smiled. Small, cold, almost invisible. He was a stubborn man, too. He flicked the reins. The mare stepped forward. The buggy turned. It rolled away up the county road in a small cloud of pale dust. Hattie stood very still until the dust was gone. Silas said, behind her, "What did he mean by that?" She said, "I don't know yet," because she did not. Not yet, but something in her stomach had gone cold. An hour before sunset, an old woman came walking up the road. She was small, bent, wrapped in a black shawl that had been mended so many times the pattern looked like a map. She carried a covered basket over one arm. She walked slowly, but she walked without stopping. She stopped at the edge of the Voss claim. She looked at the willow frame. She did not laugh. She did not smile. She did not speak. She walked around the frame once. Slowly, she reached out with one hand and pressed her thin fingers into the tightly packed bundle of tumbleweeds Hattie had begun to work into the north side. She held her hand there for a long time. Then she stepped back. She watched the wind slide across the curved side of the half-built shelter. She traced it with her eyes. Then she turned. She looked at Hattie. Her eyes were pale gray, almost silver, almost water. She said, "Who taught you this?" Hattie said, "My grandfather." The old woman's chin lifted slightly. "His name, Ezra Voss." There was a silence, so complete that Hattie could hear her own heart. The old woman set down her basket. She sat on the low stone Hattie used as a work seat. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I knew him." Hattie did not move. "I knew him a long time ago. In a place a long way from here. I have been in this county for 11 years, and I did not know his granddaughter was here until yesterday, when I heard the men at the store laughing about a girl building a house of weeds." She looked up. Her pale eyes were sharp. "I came to see if it was true." Hattie said, "It is true." The old woman nodded. Slowly, she said, "My name is Prudence Halloway." Hattie said, "I am Hattie." Prudence Halloway looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something Hattie did not expect. She said, "Your grandfather told me a girl would come." Hattie's breath caught. He said one of his blood would come to this country, and she would need something he left with me. Prudence tapped the basket at her feet. "But not today. Not yet. First you must build. First you must be laughed at. First you must almost fall. Then I will bring it." Hattie stared at her. "What did he leave?" Prudence smiled. Faint. "Sud. Wise," she said. "That is a story for winter, child. Not for autumn." She stood. She picked up her basket. She reached inside and set a small linen-wrapped bundle on the stone. "Bread," she said. "You look thin. Your brother looks thinner." She walked to the edge of the claim. She stopped. She turned back. "Hattie." "Yes, ma'am. The men in this county are going to say worse things than they have already said. The inspector is going to come back. Things are going to happen you cannot see coming. Do not stop. Do you hear me? Do not stop." Hattie nodded. Prudence's voice dropped. Very low, almost fierce. "Your grandfather did not tell many people what he knew. He told me, and through me he has told you. Do not waste it, girl. There is a reason he waited so long to send it north." She turned. She walked slowly back the way she had come. Her small figure grew smaller and smaller against the vast red sky. Hattie watched her until she was gone. Rook sat beside her. He had not moved the whole time. Silas came out from behind the tent. His voice was small. "Who was that?" Hattie said, "I don't know yet," because she did not. But she was starting to understand that this was not only her story. That night, in a small pine-walled office in the county seat, Thaddeus Rourke sat at his desk. The oil lamp burned low. A ledger lay open in front of him. He was not reading it. He was looking at a folded document. It was old. The paper was brown at the edges. The ink had faded to a rust color. It was dated 1879. It bore the letterhead of the Territorial Land Office. It was a complaint, filed by a man named Silas Vaughn, alleging that the acting deputy inspector of that district, one Thaddeus P. Rourke, had illegally reassigned a parcel of contested claim land to a party outside the original filing. The complaint had gone nowhere. It had been buried. Elias had not had the money to press it. He had gone north instead. He had taken his young wife and his baby daughter and a 9-year-old memory of an old shepherd. He had built a cabin on a rise. He had never spoken of the complaint again. Rourke had never forgotten. He had thought the Voss name was gone from his life when he read of Elias and Margaret's deaths in the winter of 1886. He had thought at last that old business was buried. Then he had received the transfer notice. 2 heirs. Harriet Voss, 19. Silas Voss, 15. He had sat in this same chair. He had held the notice in his hands for a long time, and he had smiled. Now, tonight, he unfolded the old complaint. He held it up to the lamplight. He read it once, slowly. Then he lowered it to the flame. The paper caught, curled, blackened. He watched it burn. He watched it until only ash was left. He brushed the ash into the wastebasket with the side of his hand. He sat back. He took a small key from his vest pocket. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a second copy of the complaint. Identical, yellowed, whole. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he closed the drawer and locked it. He said aloud to no one in the empty office, 2 of them left, 2 children, and a pile of weeds. He shook his head, almost gently. They will lose the land by April, and I will finally sleep. He blew out the lamp. Silas Vaughn was 15 years old, and he could not sleep. The tent was cold. His sister's breathing was steady on the other side of the canvas divider. The dog snored softly at her feet. He lay on his back. He stared up at the sagging canvas roof. He listened to the wind. He thought about his father. He thought about the day his father had let him swing an axe for the first time. He had been 11. He had missed the log completely. He had almost taken off his own foot. His father had laughed. Not cruelly, kindly. Then his father had put his big hand over Silas's small one and shown him the way. He thought about the weight of that hand. He thought about how nobody had put a hand like that on him since the winter of 1886. He thought about how the men at the store looked at him now. Not with respect. Not with contempt. With something worse. Pity. He turned his face to the wall. The next morning, when his sister was down at the creek washing, he saddled the old bay mare and rode. He rode 2 miles east. To the Crane place. To Coburn Crane's rising cabin. Coburn was up on the wall raising a log with 2 other men. He saw Silas ride up. He stopped work. He climbed down. He wiped his hands on his trousers. "Voss, Mr. Crane." Coburn looked him up and down. "You look serious, son." Silas swallowed. He said, "I want to help. Here, with your build." Coburn tilted his head. "Do you now? I can swing an axe. I can hold a log. I can carry chink." "And what do you want for it?" Silas hesitated. Then, quieter. "If my sister's shelter fails, if the inspector takes our claim, I want a place to come. I want to know I have somewhere, and I want my sister to have somewhere too." Coburn was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Slow. Why," he said, "son, you come work for me. You come work hard. And I will make sure that when your sister's little grass hut falls apart, you and her both have a roof." He clapped Silas on the shoulder, the way a man claps another man. Silas felt something in his chest loosen, and at the same time something else in his chest go tight. He did not know which feeling to trust. He said, "Thank you, sir." Coburn kept smiling. "Come on up. We'll set you to work." Silas climbed. He worked. He did not go home for the noon meal. He worked until the sun was low. He came home smelling of pine and sweat. His hands were blistered and proud. His sister was waiting by the tumbleweed pile. She looked at his hands. She looked at his face. She said, "Where were you?" He said, "Helping." "Helping who?" He met her eyes. He said, "Mr. Crane." The silence between them was the longest silence there had been between them since the winter of 1886. Hattie did not raise her voice. She did not look angry. She looked, for a moment, only very tired. Then her face closed, like a door. She said, "That's your choice, Silas." He said, "Hattie." She said, "That's your choice." She turned. She picked up a bundle of tumbleweed. She began to tie it into the frame. He stood there for a long time. He wanted to say more. He wanted to explain. He did not have the words. He went into the tent. Outside, in the falling light, Hattie tied. And tied. And tied. Her hands moving without her mind. Her chest so tight she could barely breathe. Rook lay at her feet, his eyes on her face. He did not sleep. The stars came out, one by one. She kept working. At last, when the moon was high, and her hands were bleeding, through the twine, she stopped. She sat down inside the half-finished shelter. She pulled her knees to her chest. She put her forehead against them. She whispered to the dog, "I could stop. I could go help Coburn Crane raise a cabin. I could put Silas under a real roof. He would forgive me. He would love me again." Rook watched her. And then in January or February the wind would come, and it would find a crack, and it would slide through, and my brother would cough the way my mother coughed. And he would die the way she died. In a house that everyone said was safe. She lifted her head. She looked up at the willow ribs above her, at the stars beyond them. I would rather build the strangest thing on the prairie than bury the last of my blood. She stood. She wiped her hands on her skirt. Blood and dirt. She said, quietly, into the dark, "Grandfather, wherever you are, stand behind me, just for the winter. That is all I ask." The wind moved once across the top of the frame. Softly, almost like an answer, Rook lifted his head. His ears pricked. He looked past her, into the dark, at something she could not see. She did not turn to look. She only whispered, "Thank you." And she began to tie again. October slid into November. The prairie grass browned. The nights grew longer, and Hattie Voss worked. She worked in the mornings. She worked in the afternoons. She worked by lantern in the first blue dusk. Her hands were never still. Her hair was pulled back, so tight it hurt her scalp. She stopped noticing. The willow ribs of the frame slowly disappeared, bundle by bundle, layer by layer. Each tumbleweed pressed into place. Each one overlapped the last. The twine wrapped around and around until her knuckles bled through it. She learned. She learned that the bundles wanted to be tighter than she thought. She learned that the second layer had to lap the first by exactly the width of a hand. She learned that dry weed went on the inside and greener weed on the outside because greener weed shed water. She learned that willow would not hold a knot, but hemp cord would. She learned by doing, and she learned by failing, and she learned again. Rook lay beside the work pile every day, his head on his paws, his eyes on her hands. Silas came home at dusk, sometimes later, sometimes not at all. When he did come, he ate what she had cooked. He said little. He slept on the far side of the tent. He rose before she did. He was gone before the sun. She did not ask him where, because she knew. He did not ask her how the work went, because he could see. There was, between them, a quiet that felt like winter had already come, even though the sky was still blue, even though the last geese were only just crossing south. One evening she sat at the small camp stove with a pan of beans. Silas came home with wood shavings in his hair. She said, "You hungry?" He said, "Yes." She put the beans on a plate. She handed it to him. He took it. He did not thank her. He did not thank her. He simply ate. When he was done, he set the plate down. He said, "Hattie." She looked up. He said, "I saw Mrs. Halloway on the road." Hattie's hands stopped. "She asked after you. What did you tell her?" "I said you were fine. That's all." She said. Silas paused. He would not meet her eyes. She said, "Tell your sister I am coming. And soon." Hattie set down the wooden spoon she was holding. She said, "Thank you, Silas." He nodded. Once. He stood. He went to his side of the tent. The wind moved across the canvas. A soft thing, almost tender. Hattie sat by the stove for a long time. Rook came and pressed his head against her knee. She whispered to him, "Soon." She said soon. Rook thumped his tail once. She said, "Then we don't have long." She did not know that night how right she was. The first storm came on the second Tuesday of December. It was not a large storm. Not by the standards of that country. It was, the old-timers said later, only a warning shot. It began at noon. A wall of gray came sliding across the western sky. The wind picked up. The temperature dropped by 20 degrees in an hour. By 3 in the afternoon, snow was falling sideways. Not deep snow. Not blizzard snow. Just fast, mean, sharp snow driven by a wind that seemed to have a grudge. Silas was at the Crane place. He did not come home. Hattie was inside the half-finished shelter. She had crawled inside just before the wind reached full strength. Rook was pressed against her leg. She could hear the tumbleweeds she had spent weeks weaving groan and shift above her. She could hear something else too, a soft ripping sound, coming from the north side. She held her breath. She waited. There, again. She crawled to the north wall. She pressed her hand against it. Her hand went through. Not all the way, not to daylight, but she could feel the wind, feel it moving between the bundles, feel it worming through a gap she had not sealed tightly enough. She swore, softly, only one word, surprised her. She had not sworn since her father died. She crawled back to the entrance. She looked out. The north wall had begun to lift. A whole section, for feet across, had loosened where the twine had frayed against a rough willow knot. The bundles were peeling back like a scab. The wind was pulling, slowly, patiently, the way a coyote pulls at a rabbit. If it took that section, the whole northeast quarter would go. And once one quarter went, the pressure would shift and the rest would follow. She had seen it in her mind 100 times, as she built. She had lain awake at night imagining exactly this. She grabbed the coil of hemp cord. She grabbed her knife. She grabbed her heaviest coat. She said, "Rook, stay." He whined, "Stay." He lay down, his eyes on her. She crawled out into the storm. The wind hit her like a slap. Snow drove into her mouth, into her eyes. She turned her face away. She dropped to her knees. She crawled around the outside of the dome. She reached the loose section. She grabbed a fistful of the loose bundle and pushed it back into place. She held it there with her chest against the wall. She freed one hand. She wrapped the hemp cord around it. Around and around. Her fingers went numb almost at once. She tied. She fumbled. She tied again. The wind pulled at the cord. It seemed to know what she was doing. She thought, "This is not going to hold." She thought, "If this does not hold, I have failed." She thought, "If I have failed, my brother dies." She thought, "No." She reached down. She pulled off her coat. She took her knife. She began to cut the coat into strips. Long, wide, warm wool strips. Her body screamed at the cold. She did not stop. She wound the wool strips around the outside of the loose section, over the twine, over the bundles, layer over layer. She tied each strip with a double knot. Her fingers stopped feeling the knots. They kept tying. When the wool ran out, she pulled off her outer shirt. She cut that too. She wound. She tied. She was down to her chemise when the section stopped moving. She held her hand against it. She waited. The wind pushed. The wall pushed back. It held. She sat down in the snow. She could not feel her legs. She could not feel her arms. She could barely see. She started to laugh. It was a strange sound. Not a happy laugh. A laugh that came from a place below thought. A laugh that said, "I am still here." Rook was scratching at the inside of the entrance flap. Whining. She crawled back in. She could barely move. Rook was on her at once. He licked her face. He licked her hands. He whined and pressed against her. She lay on her back. She stared up at the woven ceiling. She said, "Grandfather, that was too close." The wind screamed outside. The dome creaked, but it held. She lay there until the storm broke 3 hours later. Then she sat up. She looked at herself. Her chemise was thin. Her arms were blue. Her bloody hands had left small dark prints on the woven wall. She said to the dog, "We need better cord." She said, "We need to check every seam. Every one." She said, "We need to do it before the next storm, because the next storm will be worse." Rook thumped his tail. The storm passed. The stars came out. The temperature dropped further. Silas did not come home that night. He came home the next morning at first light. He was riding Coburn Crane's second horse. He was wrapped in a blanket that was not his own. His face was pale, but he was unhurt. He did not tie the horse. He slid down. He came to the entrance of the shelter. Hattie was outside already. She had been outside since dawn. She was checking every twine loop on the outside of the north wall. Her hands were bandaged in strips of an old flour sack. Silas saw her hands. He saw the thinness of her arms. He saw the small dark bloodstains still visible on the outside of the dome, where she had pressed against it. He said, "Hattie." She said, "You slept warm." He said, "Yes. Good. Hattie, are you hungry?" "Hattie, listen to me." She turned. She looked at him. Her face was calm. Her eyes were not. She said, "I am listening." Silas swallowed. He said, "The Anstiths came to Mr. Crane's yesterday, before the storm. They asked if he needed help with anything. Mrs. Anstith. She's the widow with the 2 little girls. She heard I was working at Mr. Crane's. She said she has an empty room. She said her husband's clothes still fit somebody my size. She said she could use a boy in the house through winter to help with the wood and the animals." Hattie did not move. He said, "Mr. Crane said it would be a good arrangement. He said the Anstith cabin is well built." He said. He stopped again. Hattie said quietly, "He said what?" Silas met her eyes. He said, your shelter is not going to hold through January." The silence that came after that was so complete Hattie could hear the last drops of snowmelt falling from the eave of the tent. She said, "Do you believe him?" Silas did not answer. She said, "Do you believe him, Silas?" He said, "I don't know what I believe." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Go pack your things." His head jerked up. "Hattie." "Go." "Hattie, I'm not saying I want to. Go. I'm saying it's the sensible thing. It's what Papa would have." "Do not." Her voice cut like the wind had cut her hands. "Do not tell me what Papa would have done." He flinched. She lowered her voice. It hurt her to lower it, but she did. She said, "Silas, you are 15. You have the right to save your own life. Nobody, not me, not the ghost of our father, gets to take that from you. Go with the Anstiths. Sleep warm. Eat well. Be a boy in a house." His eyes filled. He tried not to let them. He said, "Hattie, come with me." She smiled. Just barely. Just at the corner of her mouth. She said, "You know I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I stop, everything grandfather knew dies with me." "He's already dead, Hattie." "He isn't. Not while I am building. Not while there is one wall of tumbleweed standing on this prairie." Silas turned his face away. His shoulders shook. Only for a moment. Then he straightened. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He nodded. Once. He went into the tent. He came out 15 minutes later with his father's old carpet bag. Inside it was one change of clothes. A pocket knife their father had given him on his 10th birthday. And nothing else. He stopped at the entrance of the shelter. Rook came out. Rook pressed his head against Silas's leg. Silas knelt down. He put his forehead against Rook's forehead. He whispered something to the dog. Only Rook heard. Then he stood. He said, "Hattie, I do not want to die like Papa. Please understand that." She said, "I understand." He said, "I love you." She said, "I love you too. Go." He mounted the borrowed horse. He looked back once from the county road. He raised his hand. She raised hers. Then the road bent. And he was gone. Hattie stood in the wind, her bandaged hands hanging at her sides. Rook whined and pressed against her leg. She said out loud to no one, "That is the price. That is the price of doing something no one has ever seen." She did not cry. Not yet. She went inside. She sat down in the middle of her half-finished shelter. She put her arms around her knees. Rook climbed into her lap. He was too big to climb into her lap. He climbed anyway. Then, at last, she cried. She cried for her brother going down the road on a borrowed horse. She cried for her mother, who had never had a chance to say goodbye. She cried for her father, who had built a house he thought would save them. She cried for the 7-year-old girl, who had once pressed her palm against a warm wall. She cried until she could not cry anymore. Then she got up. She washed her face in the water bucket. She rewrapped her hands. She went outside. She began to gather more tumbleweeds, because Silas was not there. But the wind still was, and so was the promise. 2 mornings later, Prudence Halloway came walking up the road. She was carrying a basket in one hand and a small wooden box in the other. She walked slowly. She did not stop to rest. She did not seem to feel the cold. Hattie saw her coming. She set down the twine. She stood. Prudence came to the edge of the claim. She looked at the shelter. She saw the strips of wool woven into the north wall. She saw the flour sack bandages on Hattie's hands. She saw the missing horse. She saw the empty tent. She said nothing about any of it. She said, "May I sit?" Hattie brought her the low stone. Prudence sat. She set the basket at her feet. She kept the wooden box in her lap. She said, "Your brother is gone." "Yes." "With the Anstiths." "Yes." Prudence nodded. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say it would be all right. Hattie was grateful. Prudence said, "I told you I would come when it was time. It is time." She held out the wooden box. Hattie took it. It was small, no larger than a loaf of bread. The wood was dark. The corners were worn. On the lid, someone had carved a small mark. A simple thing. 2 curved lines, one inside the other like a spiral, like the shape of a shelter seen from above. Hattie touched the mark. Her fingertip trembled. Prudence said, "Open it." Hattie opened it. Inside was a book. Thin, bound in leather so old it had cracked along the spine. The pages inside were yellow. They were tied together with a strip of red twine. Hattie lifted the book out. She held it in her lap. Prudence said, "Your grandfather kept it for many years. 12 years ago he handed it to me before he died. He said, 'Keep this until my daughter's daughter comes north. When she comes and when she starts to build, wait. Let her fail once. Let her almost fall. Then bring it. Not before. Because she must first believe with her hands. Only then can she read it with her heart.'" Hattie's mouth had gone dry. She said, "Why did he not give it to my mother?" Prudence looked at her. Her pale eyes were kind, and also very sad. She said, "Read it, child, and you will see." Hattie opened the book. The first page was a drawing, careful, precise, in faded brown ink. It showed the shape of a shelter, curved, round, willow ribs, woven skin. There were notes in the margins, measurements, angles, the names of plants Hattie had never heard of, words in Spanish. She turned the page. More drawings, more notes, diagrams of how bundles overlapped, sketches of knots, a whole page devoted to the direction the entrance tunnel must face, a drawing of a small central hole in the ceiling with a note beside it. Smoke rises. Cold does not fall through. She turned another page. Now the drawings gave way to words. In her grandfather's careful hand, he wrote about the winter of 1849, about the town in the dry high country where he had lived as a young shepherd, about a storm that had come in October and lasted 11 days, about the log houses that had split like dropped china in the cold, about the families that had frozen in them, about his own family, his mother, his 2 younger sisters, all of them alive on the 11th morning, all of them alive because they had crawled into a low round shelter of grass and brush that his grandfather had built. He wrote about the wall, about pressing his hand against it, about how it was warm on one side and cold on the other, about how, at 7 years old, he had understood something he would spend the rest of his life trying to explain to people who did not want to hear. Hattie read and read. Her eyes ran over the pages the way water runs over a dry field. She read for an hour. She read until her hands were cramped from holding the book. Prudence sat beside her, quiet, patient. The wind moved softly across the grass. Then Hattie turned to the last page. She stopped. The last page was different from the others. The handwriting was older, shakier. The ink was darker, as if the pen had been pressed harder, as if the hand had been pressed harder. She read. She read it once. She read it twice. She lowered the book slowly to her lap. Her face had gone white. The last page read like this. She would remember every word for the rest of her life. "My daughter Margaret came to me in the spring of the year she married Elias Voss. She was 20 years old. She said, 'Papa, I love you. But we are going north. to a country of trees. And when we get there, my husband will build me a house of logs. Like the houses in the picture books. Like the houses the good families have. I will not live in a hut of grass, Papa. Not ever again. I am done with grass. I begged her. I did not often beg. That day I begged. I said, Margaret, take the book. Take the drawings. If the winter is very bad. If the wood ever gives out. If the wind ever finds a crack. Read it. Try. For me. She kissed me on the forehead. She said, Papa, I love you, but I am done. She left. She would not take the book. I did not blame her. She grew up ashamed of what we were. Poor, dirty, sheep people. In a country where everyone had a proper house of clay and tile. She wanted her children to be born in a proper house. She wanted them to never know shame. I have prayed for her every night since. I pray she is warm. I pray she is safe. I pray my grandchildren never come to a night when the walls do not hold. But if that night comes, if it comes, I will send this book north, and it will find them. My blood will read what my daughter would not read, and it will save what my daughter would not let me save. Because we do not throw away the old wisdom, we hand it forward, even to those who laughed at it, even to those who buried us with our old ways. That is what love is. It waits. The page ended. Hattie sat very still. She did not move for a long time. Prudence did not speak. At last Hattie said, in a voice so small she barely recognized it. She knew. Yes, she could have. Yes. Hattie closed her eyes. 2 tears slid down her face. She did not wipe them away. She said, all those years, she could have opened the book. She could have. Prudence said, gently, child. Hattie said, she could have saved herself. She could have saved Papa. She could have. Prudence reached out. She took Hattie's hand. Her old fingers were dry and light as feathers, but her grip was strong. She said, Hattie, listen to me now, because I loved your grandfather too, and I know what he would tell you. Hattie looked up. Prudence said, he would tell you that your mother was not weak. She was not stupid. She was ashamed, and shame is a mountain, girl, a great mountain. It stands between people and the thing that could save them, and they cannot climb it, and they die on the wrong side of it. Do not be angry at her. She was climbing her mountain when the wind came. Hattie's shoulders shook. Prudence said, but you are not on that mountain. You never climbed it. You never learned the shame. And now, girl, you are doing what she could not do. You are picking up the thing she threw away. Hattie opened her eyes. She looked at the woven wall around her. She looked at the pages in her lap. She said, I am not just building for me. Am I? Prudence smiled. Sud. Proud. Very old. She said, no, child. You are building for 3 generations. You are building for your grandfather, who never got to see his knowledge honored. You are building for your mother, who did not get to change her mind. You are building for your brother, who does not yet know what he will need. She squeezed Hattie's hand. You are the 4th generation. You are the one who breaks the silence. Hattie could not speak. She only nodded. Once. Slowly. Prudence rose. She picked up her basket. She said, there is bread in the basket, and a jar of preserves. Eat. You are too thin. She walked to the edge of the claim. She turned back. She said, the book stays with you now. Read it every night. Learn every drawing. Because you have 5 weeks to finish, girl. And you must finish before the sky changes. Hattie said, what do you mean? Prudence's pale eyes narrowed. She looked at the northern horizon. She said, I have lived through many bad winters. I lived through the year 51. I lived through the year 73. I know what a bad sky looks like, girl. She paused. She said, I have never seen a sky like this one is going to be. Not in my life. She turned. She walked slowly away up the county road. Hattie sat with the book in her lap. She looked north. The sky was blue, but somewhere behind the blue, something was gathering. She could feel it now. She did not know how, but she could. She said quietly to the dog and the book and her mother's memory, "I will not throw it away. I will not." She stood. She wiped her face. She picked up the twine. She began to weave. 2 weeks passed. Hattie worked from before dawn until after dark. She read the book by lantern light. She learned the shape of every knot. She learned the direction the entrance tunnel must face. She learned about the small hole in the ceiling for smoke, and the way the woven flap must close it from the inside when there was no fire. She learned the depth to which the willow ribs must be set into the earth. She learned everything. She undid parts of her old work. She redid them the way the book showed. She strengthened the north wall. She built a proper entrance tunnel 3 feet long. She added a second inner blanket door. She grew thinner, her cheeks hollowed. But her hands grew steadier. Her eyes grew brighter. Rook worked beside her. He carried small bundles in his mouth, from the pile to the wall. He seemed to understand. He seemed proud. Silas did not come. She heard once, from a passing wagon, that he was well, that he was eating 3 meals a day, that he was helping Mrs. Anstith with the woodpile, that he had gained 5 pounds. She was glad. She did not cry. She just kept weaving. Then, on a Thursday in the last week of December, something happened that Hattie did not know about until much later. Silas walked into the general store in Dry Creek Bend to buy a spool of thread for Mrs. Anstith. He heard voices in the back room. Male voices, loud, confident, laughing. He knew both voices at once. One was Coburn Crane. The other was Thaddeus Rourke. Silas froze between the shelves. He heard Coburn say, "So the paperwork is filed." He heard Rourke say, "Filed and stamped. The hearing is on the 20th of January. If she has not proved up by then, and she will not have, the claim reverts." He heard Coburn say, "And I have first purchase rights." He heard Rourke say, "You do," as agreed. He heard the clink of a glass. He heard Coburn say, "You still holding a grudge against a dead man, Thaddeus?" He heard Rourke say, "No, Coburn. I am collecting an old debt. There is a difference." He heard Coburn laugh. He heard Coburn say, "Well, whatever you call it, I get a good quarter section for pennies. You get your peace of mind. The girl gets to move to town and take in laundry. Everybody wins." He heard Rourke say, "One more thing." He heard Coburn say, "Name it." He heard Rourke say, "At the hearing, I need a neighbor to testify that her structure is not a dwelling, not fit for habitation, not a permanent improvement." He heard Coburn say, "Consider it done." Silas dropped the spool of thread. He did not notice. He walked slowly out of the store, slowly, so that his boots would not make a sound on the wooden floor. He walked out into the cold street. He stood there for a long time. His breath came in white clouds. His hands were fists inside his coat pockets. He was 15 years old. He had, that day, gained 5 pounds. He had a warm bed at the Anstiths. He had helped raise the walls of Coburn Crane's cabin. He had, on the strength of a handshake, sold his sister for a promise. He had not known he was selling her. He would swear that, on his father's grave. But the promise came from a man who was helping another man take her land. And she did not know. He did not go home to the Anstiths that afternoon. He walked in the cold, along the river, up onto the ridge above town, down through the willows, back along the road. He did not know what to do. He was too ashamed to go to his sister. He was too ashamed to face her. He had left her. He had left her in a shelter of weeds. And now he had discovered that the men he had gone to for safety were the men trying to destroy her. If he went to her now, she would open her arms. He knew that. He knew his sister. She would open her arms. He could not bear it. He walked until the sun set. He walked back to the Anstith cabin after dark. Mrs. Anstith was worried. She had kept his supper warm. She asked what had happened. He said, Nothing. I just walked. She looked at him. She did not press. She was a kind woman, widowed at 30, 2 little girls, 7 and 9. She had lost enough to know when not to ask. That night, in the small warm bed she had made up for him, Silas lay awake. He thought, I have to tell her. He thought, I cannot tell her. He thought, if I tell her, she will hate me for what I have done. He thought, if I do not tell her, she will lose the land, and then she will hate me. He thought, either way I lose her. He thought, I have already lost her. He turned his face to the wall. He whispered into the pillow, so soft that even he could barely hear it, Grandpa Ezra, if you can hear me, wherever you are, tell me what to do. The wind moved outside, softly, almost tender. He did not hear an answer. He fell into a shallow, unhappy sleep. He woke before dawn. He knew, in the way people sometimes know things upon waking, exactly what he had to do. He had to warn his sister. Not today. Not yet. He was too much a coward. He knew that about himself now, and it was a hard thing to know, but he knew it. But when the storm came, whenever it came, he would go to her. He would run to her. Through anything. Through any wind. He would go. He would carry the shame in his chest until then. And when he faced her, in the shelter she had built, he would tell her everything. And she could hate him if she needed to, or she could forgive him. It was hers to choose. That was what he owed her. He got up. He went out to chop wood for Mrs. Anstith. The sky was still blue. The last days of December drained away. Hattie finished the outer wall on Christmas Eve. She sat inside the completed dome, alone but for the dog, and ate a small piece of bread and a spoonful of Mrs. Halloway's preserves. She said a quiet grace for her parents. She said a quiet grace for Silas. She said a quiet grace for her grandfather. She said one for her mother. She said, Mama, I am not angry anymore. I understand. I am doing what you could not do. But I am not angry. She thought about the last page of the book. She thought about her mother, 20 years old, saying, I am done with grass. She thought about her mother young, and proud and full of shame she did not deserve. She thought, some people carry shame that isn't theirs. Some people die of it. She thought, not me. Not tonight. She lay down. Rook curled against her back. She slept. The last day of December came bright and clear. Prudence Halloway walked up the road one more time. She brought a small pouch of tea and a jar of soup. She did not stay long. Before she left, she stood at the edge of the claim. She looked north. She said, Hattie, come out here a moment. Hattie came. Prudence pointed at the northern horizon. The sky there was blue, but the blue was strange. It was too clear, too hard, too glass-like, as if someone had wiped a window too clean. Prudence said, That is what a killing sky looks like, before it kills. Hattie stared. Prudence said, I do not know the day, I do not know the hour, but it is coming. Soon, faster than we think. She looked at Hattie. She said, Do you have water, wood, food? Yes. Extra blankets? Yes. Do you have the book? Every night I read it. Prudence nodded. Once, slowly, she said, Then you have done what you can do. The rest is the sky's business now. She turned. She walked home. The next morning was the 1st of January, 1888. The days after that were bitterly cold. 10 below in the mornings, sometimes 20. The prairie was locked. The rivers were locked. The cabins smoked hard, and the axes rang hard, and everyone was tired, and quiet and short-tempered. Then, on the 11th of January, something strange happened. The temperature rose. By noon it was above freezing. By 2 in the afternoon it was in the 40s. The snow on the roofs began to drip. Icicles fell. Children ran out of school without their coats. Men took off their heavy jackets to work in shirt sleeves. Women hung out laundry that had been frozen stiff in the barn for a week. Everyone said, at last, the worst is over. A January thaw, a gift from God. We will make it through now. Everyone said it. At the Crane cabin, Coburn stood on his porch in his shirt sleeves and grinned at the warm south wind. At the Anstith cabin, Mrs. Anstith washed her little girl's hair in warm water and let them run outside barefoot for a moment, laughing. At Rourke's office in town, the inspector opened his window and let the mild air in and hummed to himself as he reviewed the docket for the hearing on the 20th. Silas Vaughn stood in the Anstith yard, splitting wood in his shirt, and thought that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. Maybe the storm his sister feared would never come. Maybe he would not have to face her at all. At the Voss claim, Hattie stood in front of her finished dome. She held Rook's head in her hands. She looked at the northern horizon. The strange glass blue was still there. Only harder, only clearer, only closer. She whispered to the dog, "Not a gift. A warning." She went inside. She stoked the small stove. She checked the water. She checked the wood. She checked the blankets. She reread the book by lantern light. She lay down. She did not sleep, because tomorrow was the 12th of January. January 12th, 1888. Morning came warm and bright and lying. At the Voss claim, Hattie woke before dawn. She had not slept well. She had not slept at all, in truth. She had lain awake, with the book against her chest, and Rook against her back. She had listened for wind. She had heard only silence. She stepped outside into the strange soft air. The sky was pale blue. The snow on the ground was melting in patches. A little water trickled from the edge of the dome. Somewhere, a meadowlark was singing. In January, Rook came out beside her. He did not stretch. He did not sniff. He stood still. His hackles rose slowly along his back. He turned his head to the northwest. He held that position. He did not move. Hattie followed his eyes. The northwest sky was clear. Too clear. That hard glass blue Prudence had spoken of. Only now it was closer, much closer, and along the very bottom of it, at the horizon, there ran a thin dark line, like a pencil mark, like the edge of something enormous just beginning to lift its head. She said, softly, "Rook." He did not turn. She said, "How long?" He did not answer, but he did not move either, and that told her enough. She went to work. She carried in more wood. She checked the water bucket. She checked the second bucket she had melted from snow the night before. She checked the small tin of matches wrapped in oilcloth. She checked the blankets. She checked the lantern. She checked the small store of dried meat and hard biscuit. She checked the book. She wrapped the book in oilcloth too. She placed it in a corner of the dome, where nothing would fall on it. She checked the entrance tunnel 3 times. She sat down inside. She waited. She thought about Silas. She thought about the small stubborn boy who had once carried tumbleweeds behind her, with a rope twice his own height. She thought about the tall, angry teenager who had ridden away on a borrowed horse. She thought about the 15 years between them like a rope she had been holding all his life, and how she was still holding it, and how the other end was 6 miles east and warm. She thought, please stay inside. Please stay inside. Please stay inside. She thought, if he stays inside, the Anstith cabin will hold. Mr. Anstith built it well. Coburn said so. She thought, Coburn said so. She thought, oh God, Coburn. She thought about all the things Coburn had said. About her shelter. About her sanity. About her brother. She thought about how easy it had been to hate Coburn Crane for laughing. And how much harder it was to sit here and pray that his judgment of the Anstith cabin was, just this once, correct. She said out loud, let him be right. Let him be right about this one thing, and I will forgive him the rest. Rook came inside. He lay down against her leg. She waited. At 2 in the afternoon, the meadowlark stopped singing. At 2:10, the sky in the northwest turned green. At 2:15, the wind rose. At 2:30, the temperature dropped 18 degrees in 3 minutes. At 3 in the afternoon, the world outside the dome disappeared into white. At the Anstith cabin, 6 miles east, Silas Vaughn was in the woodshed. He had been splitting kindling for Mrs. Anstith. He was in his shirt sleeves. He had been sweating. Then he was not sweating. The wind came through the shed like a hand slapping a face. The temperature in the woodshed dropped. So fast his skin registered the change, before his mind did. He looked up. The narrow window at the end of the shed had gone white. Just white, like paint on a canvas. He dropped the axe. He ran. He crossed the yard. 15 feet. Felt like 50. The wind hit him from the side and nearly took his feet out from under him. He caught the porch post. He pulled himself up. Inside, Mrs. Anstith was already moving. She had the 2 little girls by the arms. She was pulling them away from the window. She was shouting something over the wind that had suddenly begun to shake the whole cabin. She saw Silas. Relief flooded her face. She said, "Thank God. Thank God, boy. Get in here." He came in. She slammed the door. She dropped the bar across it. The cabin groaned. Silas stood in the center of the room. His breath was ragged. His shirt was stuck to his back with cold sweat. He looked at Mrs. Anstith. He looked at the little girls, whose faces had gone very white. He looked at the fire in the fireplace, which was already being pulled sideways by a draft coming down the chimney. He looked at the walls. He heard a sound. A sharp sound, like a rifle shot, only slower, only deeper. The chinking between 2 logs on the north wall had cracked. Cold air poured in, through the crack in a thin, whistling line. Silas watched a small streamer of frost form on the inside of the wall in the space of a breath. Mrs. Anstith saw it too. Her face went blank. She said, quietly, oh no." Silas said, "Where is your extra wood?" She said, "In the shed." He said, "The shed we cannot get to." She said, "Yes." Silas looked at the pile of wood by the fireplace. It was small, maybe enough for 3 hours of hot fire. Maybe. He looked at the 2 little girls. The older one was 7 years old. Her name was Cora. She had a red ribbon in her hair, from when her mother had washed her hair the day before. She looked back at Silas. Silas thought 6 miles. Silas thought 6 miles in this. Silas thought my sister is in a dome of weeds. Silas thought my sister is warm. Silas thought, oh God, oh God, oh God. He thought, I have to go. He said out loud, Mrs. Anstith. She looked at him. He said, my sister has a shelter that will hold. She stared at him. He said, you have to bring the girls. You have to bring the girls to her. Mrs. Anstith said, it's 6 miles, Silas. He said, I know. She said, in this. It's 6 miles in this. He said, I know. She said, I can't take them out. They'll die. He looked at the crack in the wall. It was already longer than it had been a minute ago. He said, they'll die here. She stared at him. He said, I'll go first. I'll break trail. I'll come back for you if I can. She said, Silas, no. He said, I have to go tell her. She needs to know to expect us. She needs to know. He was already pulling on his coat. His father's coat, that Mrs. Anstith had let him wear. He was pulling on the wool cap. He was wrapping the muffler around his face. Mrs. Anstith grabbed his arm. She said, Silas Voss, you listen to me. You are 15 years old. Your sister will never forgive me. Do you hear me? If I let you go and you do not. He looked at her. He said, my sister has been forgiving me for 3 months. He said, this is my chance to earn it. She let go of his arm. She said, God be with you, boy. He said, bar the door behind me. He pulled it open. The wind and snow came in like a wall. He stepped out. He pulled the door shut. He heard her drop the bar behind him. He stood on the porch. He could not see the barn 30 feet away. He could not see anything. He said, aloud, into the wind, Hattie. He said, Hattie, I am coming. He stepped off the porch. He was gone. The world outside the dome was pure white noise. The wind screamed, not gusted, screamed, a continuous shriek that never stopped, never softened, never changed. It pounded the north side of the dome like a fist. It slid along the curved sides and could not get a grip. The dome held. Inside, Hattie sat with her hand on Rook's neck. The little lantern burned quietly in the center of the room. The small stove had been shut down to a low glow. The book sat wrapped in its oilcloth in the corner. The air in the dome was still, warm, alive. Outside, the temperature was falling past 30 below. Inside, Hattie was sweating a little because of the extra blanket around her shoulders. She thought about Silas. She thought about him constantly. She thought about him so hard she was surprised she could not conjure him into the room by sheer force of thought. She thought, please be inside. She thought, please be barred in. She thought, please have wood. She thought, please, please, please. Rook was very still against her leg. Then, at some point she could not tell when, Rook raised his head. He held it. He listened. She said, "What?" He stood up. He walked to the entrance tunnel. He stood at the inner flap. His ears were forward. She said, "Rook." "What?" He whined. "Low."
Urgent.
She said, "Rook, it's the wind." He whined again. He scratched at the flap. She said, "No, boy, you cannot go out. You would die out there." He turned. He looked at her. His eyes said something she did not understand. Then he pushed his nose against the inner flap. He pushed his shoulder into it. He was going out, with or without her. She said, "Rook, no." He looked at her one more time. Then he pushed through the flap. He was gone into the entrance tunnel. She heard him push through the outer flap. She heard the wind take him. She sat frozen. She said out loud, "What do you know that I don't?" Then she understood. She understood the way a mother understands a sound. She grabbed her heaviest coat. She pulled it on. She grabbed her muffler. She grabbed her mittens. She grabbed the lantern. She crawled to the entrance. She pushed through both flaps. The wind took her breath at once. The snow drove into her face. She turned her head. She held up one arm. She could see nothing. She shouted, "Rook!" Her voice was gone before it left her mouth. She shouted, "Silas!" Gone. She stepped forward, away from the dome. She kept one hand on the outer wall of the dome. She was not going to let go. She had read enough newspapers to know that people died 3 feet from their own doors in weather like this. She shouted again, "Silas! Rook!" Nothing. The wind was so cold her lungs hurt to breathe it. She thought, if it is a fox, if it is a rabbit, if he is chasing a rabbit, oh God. Then, out of the whiteness, low and rough, came a bark. Rook. Not near, not far, somewhere to the east, and moving. She shouted, "Rook, here, here." The bark came again, sharper.
Urgent.
He was calling her. He was not coming back. She thought, he has found something. She kept one hand on the dome. She unwound the coil of rope she kept tied to a stake beside the entrance for exactly this purpose. She looped one end around her wrist. She fed the rope out behind her. She stepped away from the dome. The wind hit her broadside. She staggered. She caught herself. She took another step. Another. The rope played out behind her. She counted her steps. 5, 10, 15. The bark again. Closer. To her right. 20, 25. She almost fell over him. He was standing over something. Something dark. In the snow. She dropped to her knees. It was a boy. He was on his side. His arms were curled against his chest. His face was pressed into the snow. His muffler had come loose and was wound around one arm. She said, "Silas." He did not answer. She said, "Silas." He moved. Just a little. She rolled him onto his back. She wiped the snow off his face. His lips were blue. His eyes were closed. But he was breathing. Shallow. Fast. Alive. She said, "Rook, Rook, oh good boy, oh good boy." The dog was pressed against Silas's other side. He had been keeping Silas warm with his body. She could feel the heat from him even through her own coat. She said to the dog, "We need to go. Come on, come on." She got her arms under Silas's shoulders. She dragged him. 15 feet. 20. 25. Her arms shook. Her back screamed. She followed the rope back to the dome. She reached the entrance. She half pushed, half rolled her brother through the outer flap. Rook came in behind them. She pulled the flap shut. She pulled Silas through the tunnel. She pulled him through the inner flap. She let him fall onto the pile of blankets she had spread on the floor. She sealed both flaps. The wind noise dropped by half. She fell to her knees beside him. She stripped off his frozen coat. She stripped off his frozen shirt. She wrapped him in the warmest blanket she owned. She got the small stove going a little higher. She heated water from the bucket. She rubbed his hands, his feet, his face. Slowly, slowly, color came back into his lips. He opened his eyes. He looked at the woven ceiling above him. He said, "Hattie." She said, "I'm here." He said, "I made it." She said, "You made it." He said, "The Anstiths." Her stomach turned to ice. She said, "Are they?" He said, "In the cabin. Cabin is cracking. Wall going. Woman, 2 girls. 7 and 9. Cabin won't hold. Won't hold." Hattie sat back on her heels. She said, "How far?" Silas said, 6 miles. I ran. Rook found me. 2 miles from here. Maybe. She said, "You brought me 2 miles closer." He said, "Get them, Hattie. Get them." Couldn't go back. I fell. She said, "You did enough. You did more than enough." His eyes were closing again. He said, "Hattie." She said, "Sleep." He said, "There's something I have to tell you." She said, "Later." He said, "No, now, because you might not." He stopped. He swallowed. He said, "Coburn Crane and Rourke, they have a deal. He testifies against you. He gets the land. Rourke gets you off. He hates Papa. Hated." He filed. "The hearing is January 20th. I heard them in the store. I heard them, and I did not come tell you." The wind screamed against the dome. Hattie sat very still. Her face did not change, but something in her chest broke open and closed again in one breath. She said, "Silas." He said, "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I sold you. I did not know I was selling you, but I sold you. I sold you for a warm bed and—" She put her hand over his mouth. She said, "Stop." He stopped. She said, "You are here. You warned me. It's over." He said, from under her hand, muffled, "Are you angry?" She said, "I am your sister. I am not angry. I will never be angry. Do you hear me? I will never be angry." 2 tears slid out of the corners of his eyes, into his hair. She said, "Sleep." He slept. She sat there for a long moment, looking at his face, watching his breath rise and fall under the blanket, watching Rook curl beside him and press his warm body against his ribs. Then she stood up. She walked to the entrance flap. She stopped. She turned back. She looked at her sleeping brother. She looked at her wrapped book in the corner. She looked at the woven walls that had held. She said, out loud to the room, "The Anstith cabin, 6 miles. Silas got 2 miles closer. That leaves 4. In this," she said, "I cannot leave him. He is not stable. If the stove goes out, if he throws off the blanket, if—" She said, "But there are 2 little girls in a cabin. That is cracking." She said, 2 little girls." Her hands were shaking. She said, "One thing at a time. First problem. Not everyone at once. First problem. Wait. She thought about the road between the Voskleim and the Anstith cabin. She thought about what lay along that road. She thought about the little building at the halfway point. The little pine building. 2 rooms. A stove. A desk. A cot in the back. The land office field station. where Thaddeus Rourke worked when he came out to the western part of the county. He had come out yesterday. She had heard so from a passing wagon. He had come out to prepare for the hearing on the 20th. He would have started back to town this morning. He would have started back to town. In this, she stared at the wall. She said, "Oh no." She said, "Oh no." She said, "That man is not in town. That man is on the road. Or he is in that little office." She said, "Alone." She said, "With no wood." She said, "Because he never planned to sleep there." She stood in the middle of her warm shelter, with her wounded brother on the floor, and she felt her whole body go still. She thought, if I go to the Anstiths, I pass the office. She thought, if I pass the office, I have to choose. She thought, that man has spent 3 months trying to take everything from us. That man wants us gone. That man filed a paper that would put my brother and me on the streets by April. She thought, that man is going to die out there. She thought about her mother, 20 years old, saying, "I am done with grass. I am done." She thought, shame is a mountain, and people die on the wrong side of it. She thought about herself, 19 years old, standing in a warm shelter, looking at a wall. She thought, if I leave him out there, I have built a house of weeds, and I have built a heart of stone inside it. What have I saved? What have I saved? She said out loud, "I would rather die with a soft heart than live with a hard one." Rourke lifted his head. She said, "You watch him. You do not leave him. You bite him if he moves. Do you understand me?" Rourke thumped his tail once. She pulled on her coat again. She retied the muffler. She checked the rope. She refilled the little pocket lantern. She wrapped extra blankets around her chest under her coat. She stepped through both flaps. The wind was still screaming. She followed the rope to its end. Then she cut it free from the stake and rewound it as she walked, feeding it out again, from the last point of the dome, so she could find her way back. She walked into the storm. The road was gone. She followed the fence line, post to post. She could not see 3 feet in any direction. She followed by touch. She counted posts. She had counted them on a summer walk once, without knowing why. 94 posts to the fork. 51 more to the little office. 94. She lost count at 40. Panic slid through her. She stopped. She made herself breathe. She started counting again, from a post she recognized by the split in the wood. She reached 94. She reached the fork. She turned north. 51 posts. She counted them. She reached 49. Then 50. Then 51. She turned to the right. She held out her hands. She walked forward. Her mitten hit wood, the office wall. She followed it around to the door. She pounded on the door. She shouted, "Rourke, Thaddeus Rourke. It's Hattie Voss." Nothing. She pounded harder. Nothing. The door was not locked. It swung open under her fist. Inside was almost as cold as outside. The stove was out. The desk was disorderly. The oil lamp was broken on the floor. The window on the north side had blown in. Snow was piling in a thin cone on the desk. And on the floor between the desk and the door lay Thaddeus Rourke. He was on his side. He was in his good coat. His good coat was not enough. His face was gray. His fingers were bare and blue. He had been trying to crawl to the door. She dropped beside him. She said, "Mr. Rourke." He did not answer. She put her hand under his coat, against his chest. There was a heartbeat, slow, faint, but there. She said, "Not today, not today." She wrapped one of her spare blankets around him. She pulled his arms into it. She wrapped the second one over his head. She got her arms under his shoulders. He was a small man, but he was dead weight, and she was already tired. She dragged him. She dragged him across the floor of the office. She dragged him through the door. She dragged him out into the storm. She thought, 3/4 of a mile back to the fork. Then 1.5 miles to the dome. She thought, I cannot. She thought, I will. She began to pull. Every 10 steps she had to stop. She followed the fence back to the fork by touch and count and prayer. She dragged him along the county road toward home. She dragged him past the point where Silas had fallen. She dragged him past the split fence post. She dragged him along the rope. At some point she was not thinking anymore. She was only pulling. At some point she began to hear her grandfather's voice. In her ear. Steady. Calm. The way it had sounded when she was 7 years old, and he had put his hand over hers on a warm wall. Keep going, little one. Keep going. One weed at a time. One step at a time. At some point she saw the dome, rising out of the white, gray and round and holding. She almost cried. She dragged him through the outer flap. She dragged him through the tunnel. She dragged him through the inner flap. She let him roll off her arms, onto the pile of blankets. She fell beside him. Rook was on her at once, licking her face, whining. Silas was awake. He was sitting up. He was staring. Silas said, "Hattie." "Who?" Hattie could not speak. Silas crawled forward. He looked at the man on the floor. He said, "Oh." He said, "Oh. Oh, Hattie." Hattie sat up. She wiped her face. She said, "Help me." Silas helped her. They stripped Rourke's frozen coat. They wrapped him in the last dry blanket. They rubbed his hands, his feet, his face. Slowly, slowly. At some point he opened his eyes. He looked up at the woven ceiling. He looked at the two Voss children, Hattie on his right, Silas on his left, both of them working over him to bring him back. His face did not change at first. He was too cold to change his face. Then it did change. His mouth trembled. His eyes filled. He tried to say something. Nothing came out. He tried again. He whispered, "Why?" Hattie said, "Because I am not you." He closed his eyes. Two thin tears slid out and froze in the corners of his eyelashes before they reached his temples. He did not speak again for a long time. At some point in the afternoon, when the wind had somehow gotten louder, there was a pounding at the outer flap. Hattie crawled through the tunnel. She opened the flap. Mrs. Anstith stood there. She was holding both little girls to her chest under her huge coat. She was blue. Behind her, holding her up, was Coburn Crane. His face was frozen. His muffler had icicles hanging from it. He looked past Mrs. Anstith into the tunnel. He looked at Hattie. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Hattie said, "Get in, get in." She dragged Mrs. Anstith and the girls through the tunnel. Coburn crawled in behind. Inside the dome, the 7-year-old Cora took one look at the warm, still air and burst into loud, healthy sobs. Her mother collapsed onto the blanket beside her and put her arms around both girls and rocked them. Coburn Crane sat down against the woven wall. He did not look at anyone. He put his face in his hands. He said, into his hands, "The cabin split, my cabin, split down the north corner. The one Silas helped me raise." Silas, who was sitting up under a blanket beside Rourke, said nothing. Coburn said, still into his hands, "I ran to the Anstiths. She was standing in the yard with the girls. She had come out looking for Silas. Her cabin had already broken. We started walking. We only knew to walk to you because Mrs. Anstith said." He stopped. He looked up. He said, "She said her boy told her the Voss girls' shelter would hold." He looked at Hattie. He looked at the walls around him. He looked at Rourke on the floor. He looked at Rourke's face, which he clearly recognized. He looked at Hattie again. He said, "Miss Voss." She said, "Later, Mr. Crane. Later. Get by the stove." He did not move. He said, "Miss Voss, whatever I owe you, I will pay. Do you understand me?" She said, "Later." He stood. He came forward. He looked down at Rourke. His jaw worked. Then he sat down against the wall by the stove, and he did not speak for the rest of that day. 9 people, 1 dog, and 1 small stove. In a dome 12 feet across. All night, the wind ran its full course, through the dark. The temperature outside dropped past 40 below, and stayed there. Somewhere, out in that dark, hundreds of people were dying. School children in schoolhouses, farmers between the barn and the door, men in wagons who had lost the road. Nobody in the dome died. The two little girls fell asleep against their mother by 10. Mrs. Ansteth fell asleep at midnight, her arms still around them. Silas fell asleep near his sister, with his hand on Rook's back. Coburn Crane did not sleep. He sat against the wall. He stared at the small flame in the lantern. He wept, once, silently without moving. Nobody remarked on it. Rourke did not sleep either. He lay wrapped in blankets. He watched Hattie. Every time she moved, his eyes followed her. At 2 in the morning, he tried again to speak. He said, "Miss Voss." She said, "Yes, Mr. Rourke." He said, "I filed a paper against your family in 1879. I destroyed it in November. I told myself I had erased it, but I kept a copy." She said, "I know." He said, "How?" She said, "My brother told me. Also, I could see it in your eyes the first day you came." He was quiet for a long moment. He said, "I hated your father because he was a better man than I was, and I could not bear it." She said, "That is a hard thing to say." He said, "It is." She said, "Sleep, Mr. Rourke." He said, "One more thing." She said, "Yes." He said, "The hearing on the 20th of January will not proceed." She said, "Sleep." He slept. The storm broke on the morning of the 14th. The sun came up over a country that no living person on it had ever seen before. Snow lay in drifts 12 feet high against every windbreak. Cabins had been cracked open like eggs. Barns had lost roofs. Whole herds of cattle stood dead in the fields, where they had been driven together by the wind, and frozen upright, their eyes still open. Along the roads, in the ditches, in the doorways of schoolhouses, in the arms of teachers, who had died trying to shield them, lay the small, stiff bodies of children. 235 people were dead across the northern plains. None of them were in the dome. By afternoon, riders were moving. Word spread the way it does after such a storm. Slowly at first, then everywhere. The Voss girls' shelter held. All the way through. She kept 9 people alive in a house made of weeds. She saved the inspector. People rode out to see. They came by 1s and 2s. They stood at the edge of the claim and looked at the round gray dome. They took off their hats. They did not laugh anymore. Coburn Crane went home to his cracked cabin. He did not speak of what had happened for 2 weeks. Then he rode into town, walked into the newspaper office, and paid to have a full-page notice printed. It was 1 sentence long. It said, "Miss Harriet Voss saved my life. I was wrong. Coburn Crane." Thaddeus Rourke walked to the courthouse on the 21st of January. He asked to be seen by the county judge. The judge saw him. Rourke stood before the judge and, in his own words, withdrew the complaint against the Voss claim. Then he did something no one had ever seen him do. He produced from his coat pocket a folded document. He laid it on the judge's desk. He said, "This is a copy of a complaint filed against me in 1879 by Elias Voss. He was correct. I did what he said I did. I am now, at last, telling the truth." He resigned his position the same day. He never returned to the field office. 3 weeks later, on a still cold February morning, he walked out to the little rise behind the old Voss cabin. He carried the yellowed second copy of the 1879 complaint. He knelt in the snow at the graves of Elias and Margaret Voss. He placed the paper on Elias's grave. He anchored it with a stone. He knelt there a long time. Then he stood, tipped his hat to the 2 graves, and walked back to town. He never spoke of it to anyone. Hattie only heard about it years later from Prudence Halloway, who had happened to be walking past the rise that morning on her way to visit the graves herself. Spring came slow to the Dakota country that year. The snow melted in April. The prairie greened in May. The wind blew softer. The meadowlarks came back. On a bright morning in late May, Hattie walked up the rise behind the old cabin. She carried the leather-bound book wrapped in oilcloth. She carried a small folded page under her arm. She knelt in front of her mother's grave. She unwrapped the book. She turned to the last page. The one written in her grandfather's older, shakier hand. The one that ended with the words, "That is what love is. It waits." She tore the page out carefully. She folded it. She laid it on her mother's grave. She set a small smooth stone on top of it. She said, softly, "Mama," she said, "I know you were ashamed. I know you didn't mean to leave us cold. I know you were climbing your own mountain when the wind came." She said, "I am not angry. I understand. Anyone who ever grew up poor and proud understands." She said, "But I want you to know, Grandfather was right, and he was patient, and he waited, and he saved us. Through you. Through the daughter who could not open the book. He still saved us." She said, "Silas is going to be all right. He is 15. He is safe. He is home. He is with me. He is learning to weave the walls." She said, "The Ansteth girls come every Sunday. Cora tells everyone she meets that a girl in a house of weeds saved her life." She said, "Coburn Crane sends us wood every month. He does not ask for anything. He just sends it. I let him." She said, "Mr. Rourke is gone. I do not know where." She said, "Prudence says a hard heart is the coldest house of all. She says the softest walls are the warmest. She says you knew that too in your last breath when you told Papa he was right. She says that is what you meant." She paused. She said, "I love you, Mama." She placed her hand on the earth. She said, "You raised the girl who did not throw it away." She stayed there a long time. Then she stood. She wiped her eyes. She walked down the rise back to the dome, where Silas was outside with Rook, tying a fresh bundle of new spring willow into the north wall for the coming winter. The country changed after that year. By the second winter, 3 families in the county had built small round shelters of tumbleweed and willow beside their cabins. Not to live in, for storage, for calving barns, for emergency shelters if the cabins failed. By the 3rd winter there were 9. By the 5th winter no cabin was built in that county without a little tumbleweed dome beside it. People called them Voss houses, not with mockery, with respect. The old ones fell apart, as everything on the prairie does. The willow softened. The weeds broke down. The wind carried them home. But new ones went up every year. The knowledge did not die. Silas grew up. He did not go back to being ashamed. He became a quiet, thoughtful man. In time he married the older Ansteth girl, Cora. They had 4 children. The oldest was a daughter. They named her Margaret Ezra Voss. They called her Meg. She had her great-grandfather's eyes and her aunt's steady hands. Hattie never married. She was asked twice. She said no both times, kindly. She said her house was full already. She lived on the claim for the rest of her long life. She built 2 more domes in her lifetime, each better than the last. She taught anyone who would learn. She was known in her old age up and down that county as Aunt Hattie. Children rode out to her place on Sundays to hear her tell about the great storm. She always told it the same way. She never made herself the hero. She always said, "My brother ran through the wind to warn me. My dog found him. My mother, in a way I cannot fully explain, saved us both. And an old shepherd I barely remember taught me how." The story ran forward through the Voss family, from Hattie to Meg, from Meg to Meg's own granddaughter, down through the years. Every 12th of January, someone in the family would open the old leather-bound book and read aloud from the last page, so that the children would remember what a grandfather's voice sounds like when it waits 40 years to be heard. Somewhere along the way, some people asked, why did the weed house work? The answer, as science later understood it, is a simple one. The old shepherd knew, without knowing why, what modern insulation science would eventually prove. It is not walls that keep the cold out. It is trapped, still air. Air held so tightly in tiny spaces that it cannot move, and therefore cannot carry warmth away. A single tumbleweed is nothing. 10,000 tumbleweeds, packed tightly, woven, layered, become a wall of still air. And still air, held close, is one of the warmest things this world has ever known. The best insulation used in buildings today works on exactly this principle. All of them are ways to trap still air. The old man Ezra Voss did not know the physics. He knew the truth of it. He had put his hand on the wall. He had passed the truth to a small girl. The small girl, 40 years later, put her own hand on a wall she had woven, with her own bleeding fingers. The wall held. She lived. Her brother lived. 9 people lived. A stubborn, cruel man lived, and became less stubborn, and less cruel. A whole county changed the way it thought. Sometimes the answer is not new. Sometimes the answer is not expensive. Sometimes the answer is not clever. Sometimes the answer is just old. Just old, and quiet and patient, and rolling across a field where nobody bothers to look, waiting for someone brave enough to stop, someone brave enough to pick it up, someone brave enough to remember, and, when the storm comes, someone soft enough of heart to open the door. Even to the one who was trying to lock her out.